Welcome back to the Poor Persimmons Almanac.
Oh my god, we're finally covering persimmons.
It's the tomatoes of the trees. Are you so excited?
I'm beyond excited. We're finally going to learn how to grow a tomato. The end of the list, TM, has come.
No, I've got to keep that like Italian how-to like under wraps.
Oh. Are we ever going to get to it?
You know the answer to that, and I'm not going to tell you because that would take the joy out of everything.
Okay, fair enough. So tell me about these like so-called tree tomatoes.
So the tree tomatoes, as we call them, they're these big old fruit, if you're not familiar with persimmons, that kind of look like a tomato. And they're like one of the big native crops that people kind of stumble across when they're first getting into like the weird crops that we talk about, right?
Yeah, I mean, they've definitely come up a good few times on this podcast in the last, 4 years?
Yeah, so for people in the north of the continent, well, northeast and then the west coast, well, west coast, we'll get to that, I guess. But for the north of the continent, you might not be as familiar with these wild fruits, but they've been at least east of the Rockies since the Pleistocene era. And they stretched as far north as Connecticut and Long Island, which is, for our New York and Connecticut listeners, is probably an interesting fact if you're familiar with these fruit.
Shout out all our Connecticut listeners.
Yeah.
Specifically.
Specifically and only. We're not going to talk about Long Island. We're not. These fruit, these actually what are actually true berries, which when you think about it like that is, yeah. They're often listed as what's called anachronistic plants, and this is something we've talked about quite a bit this season. We talked about it with the Kentucky coffee tree, we talked about it with honey locust, we talked about it with the pawpaw, that these are plants that belong to an earlier era of the earth, right? And they didn't co-evolve as much with the landscape that exists today, so much as they did with a previous landscape that's no longer here.
Okay, gotcha. So they were they were a more central part of the ecosystems in the past than they are today.
Yeah.
And it's kind of strange to think, botanically they're berries. But, I don't know, they kind of look like a giant blueberry if you maybe are colorblind and squint.
I mean, I feel like I'm being called out here.
No.
Not you specifically with your astigmatism and your colorblindness.
Yeah, Andy, I wouldn't do that to you. I'd never.
Never do that. No. But I mean, if you think about it from like a giant sloth's perspective, it is perceptionally basically a blueberry, right?
I'd like to see a lot of things from a giant sloth's perspective. You know what I mean?
You wouldn't be the first to say that, Matt. That's what they always say.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so while this is this anachronistic tree, it's really unknown if there was like a giant sloth or not now extinct megafaunal seed disperser for these plants. If you think about it, based on the fruit size and the seed size, they're a little bit too large to be consumed by like your typical North American disperser, like birds, for example. That doesn't mean they can't eat the fruit, but they're probably not going to be carrying around and pooping out seeds. Now, one candidate for dispersal that is still on the landscape is the coyote, which consumes persimmon in large quantities.
Oh my god. This is fantastic news. I can start replacing all those feral cats I catch with persimmons to feed our coyote population. That's going to make my life so much easier.
Isn't it, though? I mean...
You know how hard it is to create a self-sustaining population of feral cats as food?
You're doing the Lord's work, Matt. You're making things happen.
And someone's work.
Yes, someone's work.
I wouldn't bring the Lord that close to it.
The Lord he shines down on thee who feed the coyote. Mm-hmm. Come on now. So during the last ice age, the fruit was driven south, obviously, because cold. It's been documented that it moved about to the Potomac River, but then again has since returned as far north as southern Connecticut in terms of wild populations, although it will likely continue to march north as climate change continues. And for, again, our favorite and only fans that we care about, our Connecticut listeners, you probably haven't really seen this tree around very much. It is there, but it is still pretty rare. The earliest archaeological evidence of the persimmon points to consumption at least 3,500 years ago around the Mississippian culture. Mississippian? I feel like it's supposed to be Mississippian, but
Oh, interesting.
I've never heard anyone say it that way. What do you think, Matt?
Mississippi. I think it's Mississippian.
I don't like that.
I don't think you need to split up the P's.
That sounds very white. No, I
Mississippi.
I rationally understand with it. I just culturally disagree with it.
Like Mississippian sounds like a
European?
Yeah, I guess I was gonna say like a genus, like an animal.
It gives us some swag. Anyways, not that important.
But we're talking about the mound builders, the snake mound, big pyramid.
Yeah, the ones down south. So we talked about the Adena a long time ago. We're not talking about those people, although, well, that's not entirely true. They kind of do get wrapped into it, but they're a little kind of the northern end of this bigger complex, you might call it. The thing about this region, and while many of our listeners may know this, but you'd be surprised how few people actually do, this culture it was a collection of indigenous societies that was considered to be the most complex in pre-Columbian history to exist in North America. With that in mind, there were 2 sites in this region that had refuse pits that showed remains of persimmon 80% of the time.
80% of the time?
Yeah, all the time.
80% of the time? There's persimmons every time.
Every time. So, for example, the Coles Creek peat culture, which existed in the lower Mississippi Valley between about 700 and 1000 AD, relied heavily on acorns and pecans as their staple crops. But persimmon was frequently cited as the largest fruit crop as part of their diet, alongside grapes, which, man, I cannot wait to start talking about grapes. It's probably next season, but I'm real pumped about it.
Oh, yeah.
What's particularly interesting about the Coles Creek people of what's modern-day Louisiana is that they had a complex fisher-hunter-gatherer society that blended elements of the Mississippian culture, the passive domestication of the same crops of the Eastern agricultural complex of the Adena, and despite being exposed to domesticated maize as early as 750, didn't incorporate it into their diet as a staple until nearly 400 years later, between about 1000 and 1200. A certain researcher named David Lance argues that the shift wasn't due to maize's capacity as a crop, but rather increasing pressure from the lower Mississippi Valley, which valued maize for its role in ritual, and probably as like a tool of centralization of power and like the development of like this stable, static, walled-in civilization.
I mean, taxes gotta get collected, Andy.
Someone's got to pay those taxes, and sure as shit wasn't the rich people.
I wish we could still pay taxes just straight corn.
Straight corn.
You know?
Here's my sock of corn for the week.
Just like wheelbarrow load. Could be fun. We should try it.
Could be. I mean, we could try it. What if we made a corn meme coin? Is that a thing? Can we do that?
Oh, I'm sure there's about 50 of them.
I just found out that there's a Luigi meme coin, and I'm like, I might invest in Bitcoin or cryptocurrency now.
Yeah.
I might just have to do it just once.
Oh, yeah, okay. It looks like there is something that's just straight up called corn. Like a coin that's straight up called corn.
That's amazing. We need to bring the news to the people. I'm mad we didn't do it.
I don't know. I feel like I'm glad we didn't. You know?
I mean, I don't want to have done it, but I also feel like if somebody was going to do it, it should have been like us.
It's kind of like those people that go to like contemporary art museums and they're like, anyway, like, my kid could have done this.
Yeah, basic. That's me.
But it's just you with meme coins.
Yes, it's me with my corn meme coin.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how any of this works.
I think a Norm's Nuts.
It's a great idea. Invest in it.
I think a Norm's Nuts coin could be big. I think that could be our first big rug pull.
the nuts coin?
Yeah. We'll do a rug pull, call it the Nut Yank. Anyway, so we were talking about taxing corn as a mechanism to levy taxes and the centralization of power within the lower Mississippi indigenous cultures.
Yeah, so
let's get us back on track.
Cool,
Andy.
cool plant. They were still like, listen, We like our tree crops. Kindly fuck off.
Yeah.
And that's, it's really interesting that they had like this really cool mismatch of like semi-domesticated crops and tree crops. And even after that arrival of the maize and kind of its central role in the Mississippi Valley, they continued to keep that persimmon as like a central role in the diets of their food system.
They saw corn and they were like, you have to plant it every year?
But what do I do next spring? Plant it again?
You're telling me that this plant lives to 1 year old? No, never mind.
And you want him to be happy about this?
And you want me to base my entire agricultural livelihood on this?
Trust me, it's a good deal.
The foundation of my society?
Yeah, what could go wrong? But alongside the Coal Creek, a group called the Plaquemine, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong, and I am sorry, I could not find a pronunciation for this. They utilized complex systems in the same area, which utilized complex systems that incorporated maize fields that were alternated with groves of pecan, oak, and persimmon that ran along the bottomlands of river edges.
Man, that does sound beautiful. If there's one thing I love, it's a complex of groves and fields and bottomland. You know what I mean?
It's those soggy bottoms.
You just can't beat it.
Can't stay away from them. And to that point, I'm sure there's much more to these systems that hasn't been documented, that's been lost to history. But my point is that, like, in this region, they had created these really cool, creative polyculture perennial systems that they, even with the greatness of corn in terms of productivity, they were still kind of like, sure, we'll add a little bit of it, but like main crop, nah, we're good. And like, who could blame them when they have all of this food that was already available? And with the persimmon specifically, while the fruit was eaten fresh, most of it was actually stored for winter consumption. The most common method was drying the fruit, which could be consumed, dried, or ground into a powder, and then added to foods. Now, the name John Smith may ring a bell for some folks. He described the Powhatan people who called persimmons puchemins. As they were preserving these persimmons, they did so by drying them on mats, similar to the drying process that was used for elderberries that we talked about a few weeks back. And he called this practice prunes, is the term. So I'm assuming that has something to do with the word prunes. Yeah. Shot in the dark.
Good guess.
Now, the dried powder could be used to make bread or mixed into porridges and things like that. They could also do this with the pulp, too, if they didn't. So you could have the pulp, make bread, use it in stews and porridges, or you could continue working it and drying it out into that powder.
Yeah. If I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. I love a good pulp. You gotta have the pulp.
With or without pulp? I said some pulp.
I like the one that has some pulp. Tony Soprano.
My people. It's never been more proud than in 2024.
Yeah. I'm just about to finish that show, too.
Oh, it's a good one. Now, another method was to cook the persimmons into a pulp, which we just talked about a little bit. And that could be shaped into cakes and dried for preservation. So not only could you ground it into a powder, you could also make these cakes. Early travelers such as Jacques Gravier and John Bradbury documented these as gifts from indigenous chiefs, suggesting they were prized and used as tools of cultural and diplomatic exchange. Further, that pulp could be used to make into, again, stews and preserves and a lot of the same stuff we've kind of covered with a lot of the other fruits that we've covered. So basically, this was your go-to preservable sugar source for much of this region.
You know, I feel like we really don't spend enough time using like fruit in stews. Like, can you name one stew that has fruit in it?
Does a smoothie count?
Andy, you know a smoothie doesn't count. Jesus.
Yeah, then no, you're right. There's I can't think of anything. So what I'm thinking, hear me out, like a sunchoke persimmon stew with some like rabbit and wild rice. How do we feel about that?
That sounds fantastic. I mean, rabbit goes well with berries and rice, so like a nice like nutty sunchoke. I mean, Andy, you make it, I'll eat it.
More coming in the Poor Pearls cookbook or something. Now, the Rappahannock and many others would use the persimmon as a staple ingredient to create like beers. And we talked about this a bit with the honey locust episode, that they could mix the honey locust because it had that intense sugar, the honey, right, with the persimmons. And then often they would mix it with cornmeal and just allow it to ferment. While this was done 1,000+ years ago, it still kind of exists in Appalachian culture until the present. Depending where you go, you can still kind of find this. And I think that's a really beautiful thing for it to have somehow survived that whole period, because if there's anything that keeps humanity together, it's alcohol.
Truly.
Shout out to the Appalachian people still doing this. To contextualize how significant the persimmon was, even after disease had ravaged the continent, the first time white people showed up, when settlers arrived later on at these abandoned settlements where people had once lived, they described how the landscape in this region was covered in fruit and nut trees, and depending on the author, they treated them as either orchards or just like really well-tended wild landscapes, because like they were kind of in between, right? It was like semi-wild landscapes, which really, a big question we keep bringing up with a lot of the fruits that we've talked about, a lot of the nuts we talked about last season, is really like, were some of these trees and these perennials in the process of domestication? And I don't think we really have an answer to that still.
Yeah. And I mean, I think we talked a little bit about it then, that like definition of domestication is like a strict definition doesn't really like properly describe this.
No.
And there's like the vocabulary for, well, you know what? Maybe it's just that I don't know. Maybe
you're pedantic as shit.
Yes, maybe I'm pedantic as shit. Thank you.
There we go. Listen, I am too, so I appreciate it. Sorry, did you actually have anything else you wanted to add to that?
Nope.
Okay. Okay, so as colonization took off, landscapes were cleared. The persimmons were very much cleared off the landscape compared to how they once were. And this included many of those managed trees that had been on the landscapes for generations. Interest really waned on the American persimmon until about the 19th century, notably the period when Michigan Agricultural College, which hopefully rings a bell for some folks,
Big Mac,
focused its efforts on native plants. Now, a young man named James Troop graduated from Mac in 1878, 4 years before a name you may remember, Liberty Hyde Bailey, but they had likely known one another while attending, as Troop remained with the school as a faculty member immediately after graduating.
LHB back and back again.
Literally.
An unstoppable force.
Yeah.
The thread that holds it all together.
Literally the thread that holds most of American agriculture together.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to our boy once again. Regardless of whether they did meet at this time, which they did, but even if they didn't, they would later go on to work together when James Troop managed the Indiana Experimental Station, which fed information to Bailey, who oversaw national research projects, including what was going on in this experimental station. So they knew each other. At some point, they knew each other. And this becomes more obvious because our boy finished his master's degree at Mac 4 years later, or 5 years later, in 1883, and he joined Purdue University's Department of Horticulture. And this is where he'd remain for most of his career, and where we would take some of the first steps in the rebirth of an interest in the American persimmon. He would go on to do like all of the extensive early research on the American persimmon. He was interested in how it distributed across the landscape, how to propagate it, how to cultivate it, what we could do to improve the quality of the fruits from it. And in this process, he started working with a guy named O.M. Hadley. And this guy was in charge of that experimental substation that I was just talking about that is tied to Bailey's research. And this is where they collected the best-known cultivars of the time. This collection included Daniel Boone, Early Bearing, Early Golden, Golden Gem, Hicks, Kansas, Shoto, and Smeech, which I know you've all heard of all of them, so why am I repeating them to you?
Yeah, I mean, Smeech is a household name, Andy.
You getting Smeeched this weekend?
Dude, I'm gonna be off my tits with the Smeech.
Exactly. Just hitting the hoochie, the Smeechy hooch.
Last night we let the Smeech talk.
Yeah, so of all those cultivars, though, the only one that remains is Early Golden. Basically, all of our modern selections are mostly related to early golden, at least the ones that come from like lineage, right? And the interesting thing is, despite all the research that they did, there doesn't seem to be any publications affiliated with any of those other selections. So like, we don't even really know much about what the fruit was like or why they thought there was potential there.
I mean, it's kind of like a classic tale of native crops. Like someone discovered a bunch of shit and then they were like, nah, no thanks. I'd rather find this out the hard way again and again.
Yeah, America's just got like this really bad case of like defiance disorder, right? Where we're just like, nah, it's okay. I'd rather be miserable and difficult. Now, their collaborative work resulted in the publication of a little book. It's about 30 pages or so long, called The American Persimmon. And this was released in 1895. It was the first written piece focused on the potential of the American persimmon in history, outlining its potential areas of future research. It was also here that the first evidence of persimmon grafting and discussions about identifying superior varieties were made to improve fruit production. As we're going to talk about in a little bit, the persimmon has an incredibly diverse selection of genetics, and it was this reason that Dr. Troop believed that it would be inevitable, that it would be like a staple of the American diet. He believed that we'd create bigger fruit, sweeter flavor, reduced astringency, that it was inevitable. The resources were there for us to do. We just had to take the time and do it. He would later on go on to do the first chemical analysis of the American persimmon. That provided some of the first evidence of like the nutritional composition of persimmons, which was like, hey, not only are they sweet and big and native and have like no pests, but also there's a ton of really great nutritional benefits to this fruit. This is basically, now looking back, the foundation of like all breeding efforts all stems back to like this bit of research.
Man, I mean, I know Dr. Troop like probably didn't get into like persimmon breeding for the fame, but that's a pretty cool way for like to sum up your life's work.
Yeah, you started this avalanche of niche crop growers.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is really, you have to support your troop.
You have just the one though.
Support our troop.
Support our troop. Yeah.
Never forget.
Specifically Dr. Troop.
Specifically, one troop in particular.
Mm-hmm.
Two troops. Dr. Troop and Goof Troop. Those are the only troops I support.
What's Goof Troop?
You don't know? Oh my god, Matt. I forget how young you are. I have so many things to teach you about the world.
Okay. Goofy. Why did you say Goofy?
No, Goof Troop is a movie. Well, Goofy movie, but yeah, Goof Troop is a whole thing.
The Untold Story of the Goof Troop. Maybe that'll be the next Poor Persimmons Almanac.
Deep dive.
Yeah. We're taking a turn away from sustainable agriculture and now more into like 90s Disney movies.
Yeah, that makes sense. It totally lines up.
Mm-hmm. Or like deep, goofy lore.
the goof lore.
Yeah.
The hyuk. The hyuk heard around the world.
Yeah. Okay.
We don't have to keep any of this, Dom. I'm sorry.
It's just vamping.
So it wouldn't be until nearly 50 years later that interest would return to the American persimmon. And it came with a guy named, you may recognize the name, Professor JC McDaniel.
Pretty cool.
He began studying the fruit in 1915 at his childhood home in Alabama. We've mentioned McDaniel before. He was involved in some of the limited work around the Kentucky coffee tree breeding, and he worked at the TVA alongside John Hershey. So if you haven't listened to those episodes, go check them out. McDaniel worked to select and breed several persimmons, including crags, which can still be found today. He was also responsible for the first use of hand pollination around persimmon and focused on hybridizing the American and Asian persimmon. McDaniel wasn't the only one working with the American persimmon in the early 20th century. Another name we've talked about, George Zimmerman, the pawpaw breeder, the guy that basically did all the work for pawpaws and everyone was like, nah, also worked with the persimmon.
Man, I feel like if you listen to like all of these episodes like 8 times, you'd catch all these like cross crop references.
Crops references?
Yeah, of people just doing cool stuff.
Listen, you're trying too hard. You're going to hurt yourself. It's going to come naturally, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
You do the puns. They just start to flow off the tongue. It's a natural skill.
The crop cross.
Crops references.
Cool,
come on.
The cool crop cross reference.
You're almost there, buddy. I can hear you fighting through the pain. So proud of you.
Mm-hmm.
But no, you are right. This is such an insular community. Once you know all the players, you see them overlap. Like George Zimmerman, he wasn't just a pawpaw guy, even though like he's renowned for this. He did other stuff too. So we shouldn't just ignore that. And we haven't even covered a lot of smaller actors that were very important, but may not get the same recognition that some of the bigger names do. And I really wanted to do some mini episodes on those if we could find enough research.
Yeah. Do we have a, like, on the list, is there like a little flap that folds out with like a mini to-do list of like these like other little episodes you want to do?
Yes, there is. There absolutely is. And it's getting longer than the regular list.
Oh, wait, Jesus. That's where George Zimmerman is also kind of an unfortunate name now.
Yeah, I didn't want to talk about that part, but we can if you want, Matt.
We can cut. It's just a different George Zimmerman.
A much worse George Zimmerman.
Yeah.
So, while breeders work to select improved varieties, much like we've seen with the honey locust and some other plants, annual contests were used to identify numerous new genetic sources for improved persimmons, which has made tracing these genetic lineages of selections available today particularly difficult. One particular competition has made a lasting mark on the American persimmon's potential, and that's the Mitchell, Indiana Persimmon Contest, which has had dozens of winners go on to be named. So if you're near Mitchell, Indiana, go get yourself some fucking persimmons. I don't know what else to say. The festival is so influential. Colonel Sanders, yes, that guy, was an honorary judge in the 1970 competition, and he actually attempted to use the American persimmon as an ingredient in test kitchens. The problem was he just couldn't get enough pulp.
He couldn't get the pulp. He only had some pulp.
If he only wanted some pulp, if he was Italian, he would have been fine.
So, I mean, level with me here, Andy. How close were we to Kentucky Fried Persimmons?
We were so close, Matt. Can you imagine?
Throughout the country, restaurants that specialize in... Can you deep fry a persimmon?
You can deep fry like a fucking brick. I think you can probably deep fry a persimmon.
Deep fried persimmon. Oh, they look good too.
Getting that DP.
They look kind of like donuts.
Wait, have you found deep fried persimmons on the internet?
Yeah, I just googled deep fried persimmon and clicked on images.
It's very technical.
Oh, these are persimmon cakes, deep fried. Listeners, give it a go. Let us know how dumping several gallons of persimmons into a deep fat fryer goes.
And the key is to not pay attention to the heat temperature of the oil.
Yeah.
That's how you get that right crisp.
Mm-hmm. And just like get them all in as quickly as possible.
And make sure they get deep, so you have to drop them from very high up.
Yeah. Just make sure that like flame
You got this.
is accessible.
That's where the singe comes from. It gets the crisp. Yeah.
Anyway, so...
Yeah, take all of our advice as sarcasm entirely.
Let us know how that goes, and please send us our cut of the insurance check.
We're kidding.
Yeah, that's the thing that's going to get played in court.
We want the whole check. Now, another guy, an Illinois attorney named Floyd Sonneman, also collected tons of persimmon, including all of the best he could find, including many winners of the Mitchell, Indiana Persimmon Contest. Now, some of these cultivars are now thought to be extinct. Womp womp.
Womp womp.
Although unnamed, many of these genetics would become important as James Claypool developed his persimmon orchard decades later, and are likely part of the University of Illinois' persimmon breeding program as well. In the 1970s, James Claypool, guided by our buddy Professor JC McDaniel, began what would become the largest American persimmon breeding project in the world. Granted, no one else cared, still very cool. Now, over the course of almost 3 decades, Claypool created thousands of controlled crosses between the best-known cultivars of the time and kept detailed records, which are still available online today. As stated before, many of these selections originated with that Mitchell Persimmon Festival, including one called Beavers, the second-place winner from the 1954 competition, Lean, the winner from 1955, Morris Burton, the winner of 1957, and Yates, the winner of 1983. And yes, those all sound like different types of cocaine.
Yep, okay. I'm glad we're on the same page. Also, just like, I don't know, it was like 20 years between those competitions and this like breeding project. I mean, what I really love when we talk about the history of like specifically tree crops is that it like requires so much more of like a generational handoff. It's like it's like a group project through time, like compared to a lot of like other breeding work. It's focused on like not such long-lived perennials.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of like the passing of the baton, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you have the race, but you don't get to see the end of it.
Yeah.
You just get to say like, well, at least when I left off is better than where I started.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
And then there's also lots of mistakes in between, and lots of information gets lost, and the baton gets dropped and found in a filing cabinet, and
Like most of it in our case, usually.
or on the corner of someone's farm or arboretum
Or that.
or that.
Now, our buddy Claypool passed away in 2010, but before his death, he did put together a plan for his orchard in St. Elmo, Illinois, which was to be managed by Jerry Lehman. And this is a rare success story of genetics getting passed along. Lehman managed the orchard and digitized Claypool's extensive notes until his death in 2019. Jerry was also responsible for pawpaw breeding work and named several cultivars himself. Today, the elders of the American persimmon breeding world have continued to incorporate new genetics and cross the genetics from previous generations. Although many are getting older, some have recently passed, such as John Gordon. Some of the bigger names right now in the world of persimmons include Cliff England in Kentucky, Donald Compton, Lucky Pittman, Buzz Ferver, who's been on the show, Ken Asmus, who's also been on the show, and the Savannah Institute are continuing to work with the same genetics that we've covered to this point in order to find improved selections, as well as countless others who have quietly continued this work without getting their name well known or recognized. And there's plenty I have not mentioned who contributed importantly to the genetic pool that is available today, to the point that the American persimmon in many ways is unique in the sense that it does have so many hands involved that it's very much like this communal project. And like that is really manifest in like the Savannah Institute's work, planting tens of thousands of seedlings from these known parents. And they're still working on figuring out what's in there, including grafted cultivars from McDaniel, Hershey, Claypool, Lehman, Gordon, and Compton, and countless others. So that's going to be like the one central place to kind of see how all these things work out together and see what comes out of it.
Man, that's it. That's a lot of people doing breeding.
It is. And for those who have been listening to the show, we had Eliza Greenman on a year or two ago. And she is involved with the Savannah Institute and is very invested in the future of persimmons. So again, lots of people doing really cool stuff and giving me a lot of hope for the future of the American persimmon. With all that said, with all those different breeders, all those selections made, why are people still trying to continue to improve the American persimmon? In other words, what's missing from this fruit? To answer that question, we really have to understand how the genetics of the American persimmon work and where its shortfalls as a fruit crop exist.
Man, we've been working on this episode for a while, and I just realized we haven't, like, even talked about the fruit.
You're about to get fruit pilled, son. Persimmons are typically dioecious, meaning that reproduction requires a male tree and a female tree. However, some selections are occasionally capable of producing male, female, or even perfect flowers, which allows for certain varieties to serve as either male or female in a cross. One of the particularly useful findings from Claypool is that pollen from a female cultivar can be used to pollinate another female cultivar, and the progeny of that pollination will be female almost every time. This allows for some selection pressure to get fruit-producing trees. However, this isn't the only unique trait of the persimmon. Another key aspect of the American persimmon genetics is the existence of two distinct races, a tetraploid, meaning 60 chromosome, and a hexaploid, 90 chromosome. These races have different geographical distributions, with the tetraploid race concentrated in the southern Appalachian region, and the hexaploid race found north and west of this area, although they overlap a bit in Kentucky, which is interesting because this is a similar genetic overlap for the different lines of the pawpaw when we had talked about those two separate types of pawpaws. Dr. Kirk Pomper, who we had on like 2 months ago, identified this overlap over at KSU and why it's important.
I mean, we've talked about polyploidiness in the past too, like that higher polyploid is tied to like bigger plants and like bigger fruit.
This is true. And this also explains why, if you look at like commercially available cultivars, they're primarily derived from the hexaploid race. With the hexaploid persimmons, they not only represent the most available cultivars, but they also exhibit what's called parthenocarpy. And what this is fruit development without fertilization. This is what leads to seedless fruit. While crossing two different races, like these two tetraploid and hexaploid, can also create seedless fruit, the fruit quality is usually worse than either of its parents doing it this way, so the hexaploid selections have been prioritized over crosses. We talked about those older selections from Dr. Troop, and early golden and meter, for example, are hexaploid, and that again is kind of the starting point of that genetic lineage that we have today.
Oh man, I'm gonna need to go and revive that Christian Moms Against Seedless Persimmons Facebook page that we started.
Yeah, but what are you going to do with the school seats that you got?
On the school board?
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna push the seedless persimmon out of our schools. It's ungodly.
Well, now you're going to have to expand.
Mm-hmm.
What about all the other fruits? There's so many fruits you can go after.
Yeah, exactly.
You start with, this is the slippery slope. You start with the seedless persimmon, and next thing you know, you're putting dinosaur genes in your rhinoceros and mixing them with humans. And
next thing you know, you're crunching down on a grape.
You're crunching down on a grape. And it's all over. I don't know what that means, but I'm going to trust you on that one.
What, a seed in a grape?
Oh, seedy grape? There's no seedless grapes. Okay,
Yeah.
You got a point there.
There are seedless grapes.
There are, but I guess I feel like I get seedless grapes and there's still seeds in them. I constantly feel like I'm lied to.
You've been swindled.
Yeah. Why am I paying a premium for these seeded grapes?
It's the government that snuck the seeds back into the grapes when you were sleeping.
Because the vaccine is in there? That's how they get you. It's the crunches, the microchips.
Oh my god. This is the new thing we need to... What did they warn us against? Spreading harmful disinformation?
I only spread harmful.
This isn't harmful. This is just disinformation.
It's just straight up disinformation. Straight uncut disinformation.
It's a victimless disinformation.
The most victimless crime is disinformation. Yes. Arbitrary disinformation.
That's the bumper sticker. The most victimless crime is misinformation.
There we go. We got it, guys. Another one down.
Another banger in the vault. $10 a pop.
We've never printed one of these. We really should. Now, one of the other major factors influencing persimmon as a conventional crop is the fruit's astringency. This is caused by tannins, usually around the skins, which decrease as the fruit ripens and softens. Limited research has been done regarding how and why certain fruits are more astringent than others. However, at this point, it's believed to be tied to seed development, which would suggest that hexaploid would make sense longer term in regards to breeding.
That's the Lord's astringency, Andy. It's meant to be in there.
The astringency tells you that you're only supposed to eat meat, and that's why you don't eat it.
Mm-hmm. The astringency tells you that with all fruit, a little suffering.
Because you deserve it.
Yeah.
We're very Puritan in our
Well, because of the original sin. Yeah. Of course. Well, this is a Puritan-based podcast.
As everyone knows.
Right? We broadcast from the Mayflower Museum.
Yes. So this astringency is also why, if you've ever had an American persimmon, you typically eat it when it's almost mush, which for many Americans is not a very particularly palatable profile. There are a few ways to remove astringency, and as somebody who only eats American persimmon very occasionally, this was really interesting to find out some stuff that I'd never really thought about as a tool to deal with this. Typically, people just leave the fruit on the countertop, and eventually it will ripen. That's fine if you've got enough space, right? And you got time. Alternatively, you can use CO2, and this is something that's been pretty effective with Asian persimmons, and it's been used in limited times with Americans. Another traditional method that hasn't been explored as much in recent history is nixtamalization. We didn't talk about it, but there is a very, very limited evidence of people nixtamalizing the fruit. Basically, what you're trying to do in this process is, like, you're not going to make the tannins go away. What you're going to do is you're going to make them insoluble. And many of the methods used today rely on creating anaerobic conditions that makes the fruit accumulate acetaldehyde, which then reacts with the tannins.
Man, I'm having flashbacks to the acorn episode.
As you should, Matt. Now, researchers have continued to find new ways to create these conditions, from alcohol to water soaking and even freezing. This is really an area where significant trials should be done to assess the most efficient method. As things stand today, freezing is likely the most efficient method for a puree, which would require a minimum of 70 days to be fully effective with American persimmon based on data. However, some people have said that even just 4 days gets rid of most of it. Another option is containing that fruit in the CO2 for a full day, which can be done quickly with the added benefit of the fruit remaining firm, so you can still get that firm profile that a lot of people like. Other treatments still remain potentially useful, mixing with proteins, which can bind the tannins, as well as ethanol, and potentially even gelatin, which is used in winemaking to remove harsh astringency. Other research has found that using pectin and xanthan gum can also be effective at removing the tannins. Now, Matt, people can't see this, but you can see it if you jump on our Substack. Check out this picture of a homemade CO2 chamber based on chambers made for euthanizing rats for feeding pet snakes by a poster on the growingfruit.org forum.
Wow. I didn't realize they made such equipment. Makes sense.
I mean, please describe this thing to me.
Okay, so basically what you have here is the base of it is a Tupperware. Yeah, it's for sure Tupperware. And then there's a little hose, a little twisty hose that connects to, I guess, a bottle of CO2. And then there's like a little vent thing that bubbles into a little water glass, so it's like an airlock thing. And they're trying to kill them. They're trying to kill those beautiful persimmons by suffocating them.
Yeah, that's about right.
And I just won't stand for it anymore, unfortunately.
It's been too damn much.
I'm putting my foot down here, and I'm saying free the persimmons from this euthanasia chamber.
It started with the seedless, and look where it's gone.
Yeah. First they came... No, never mind.
Too many gassing jokes for one episode. Now, additional research is really needed to focus on earlier ripening and fruit hanging through ripeness, because one of the challenges is that with these late harvests of fruit, a lot of times these fruit fall to the ground before they're fully ripe, which, can make it a little bit difficult to harvest and keep clean for consumption. No one wants to eat fruit off the ground. These areas have received less research attention, but as the other parts become fine-tuned, I don't have any doubt that that's where a lot more attention will be put. Some folks like Jerry Lehman believed that the future of the American persimmon was in processed goods, meaning skin thickness and non-astringency were far more important for future breeding than these other issues.
Honestly, I don't know, that kind of makes sense. I would love a little persimmon jam. Persimmon jelly.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say no.
Yeah, a persimmon Newton, if you will.
Ooh, that actually sounds pretty good.
As long as it has, enriched flour and maybe corn syrup.
You're sold?
I'm sold.
Yeah, sounds about right.
As long as we get the GMO in there somehow.
You need it. Need to get that cut.
Yeah, I need my fix of fixed genes. Anyway, so what if I want to buy a persimmon tree? What's the landscape look like?
What am I looking for? Or...
Yeah.
So there's lots of breeders. You're not going to get it much from a lot of the bigger breeding places, but a lot of people are doing cool stuff. We talked about Zach Elfers and Buzz Ferver, and there's a number of breeders. If you're looking for selections, Early Golden is still kind of one of the standards. There's a lot of descendants from early golden that are available that are supposed to be pretty good, and you're basically going to be looking for like one of 5 breeders in terms of like selections from Hershey, Claypool, Lehman, John Gordon. Those are like the 4, and then Donald Compton, like I said before. Getting any of their stuff is you're going to have a pretty good fruit. There's really no best. It's just like a lot of people doing similar stuff. One of the really interesting things about persimmons, especially the American persimmon, is that you can see that there's like kind of different strains of flavor profiles. And like for me personally, I really like the more like rum caramelized sugar profile that you can get with some of the fruits. I find that really enjoyable, and you don't really get that with like the Asian persimmons. So that's when that's the direction I would say is go look for those. On our Substack, we have a list of what I think it's like 10 or so that I was like, here's 10 really good, diverse fruit trees. So if you're like, I want to get 4 or 5, you get 4 of these, you're going to probably get 4 cool, slightly different, delicious, different use fruit trees, persimmon trees that will make you happy.
They're going to make you happy, folks.
They're going to make you happy.
There's one thing we can guarantee.
Which is everything, because we're never wrong. So just jot that down.
Facts.
So with all that said, the persimmon's great because it can grow basically anywhere. It's a really fast-growing, nutritionally dense fruit, and has very little insect pressure. Can deal with dry soils, wet bottomlands, from basically Canada to Georgia. Yeah, I hope people get a little bit more excited about this fruit because it is important for the future of our ability to survive on this landscape in the long term and, support native habitats. So
sure is.
NBD, guys. NBD.
Just that little thing.
That old ecosystem collapse thing.
And on that note, for sources and all that fun stuff, if you want to see Claypool's selections that he made, go check out the Substack, agroecologies.org. We've got the links to that fun stuff, the list for the fruit trees I would suggest. It's free, all that stuff. The persimmon chamber.
The persimmon chamber picture, got to see that. If you guys want to support us, you can do that over there. Become a premium subscriber, $5. You can also join Patreon for $2 a month. You don't have to listen to the annoying ads that we're forced to put in there, so we can pay for fun stuff that we can't officially announce that we have coming. So we're not just pocketing the cash. We're doing cool stuff with it, but I can't fully announce that quite yet. But hopefully soon.
Well, Andy's not pocketing the cash. I'm pocketing the cash. He just doesn't know about it yet.
It's all Matt, actually. Yeah, exactly. So that's pretty much it. Give a shout out to Dom for having to edit whatever the fucking monstrosity this became.
Thank you, Dom.
Thank you, Dom. You're the best. Love you.
XOXO.
I gotta get some water. Be right back.
Now's my time to shine. Let's see, listeners. What are we going to talk about?
Dom, you gonna keep that slurp in?
You got to give one for the microphone.
Yeah, the slurp heard around the world again.
Yeah. This guy with his...
Sorry, Dom.
with his generic brand water.
My Great Value brand.
Yeah.
You want to come for me? Oh, okay. We're good now.